Good morning, Dr. Yasmin and everyone in attendance today. So let me start off by introducing myself. My name is Liew Teck Chie, and today I'll be presenting my bachelor dissertation, which has the title of The Impact of Institutional Quality on Economic Welfare in Malaysia. So first, let us go into the background of the study. Malaysia has been experiencing rapid economic growth since gaining independence in 1957. As you can see from the graph, the Malaysian economy has been growing at a steady rate from 1957 to 1970 and starts to grow exponentially from 1970 onwards. This is due to the diversification of the Malaysian industry from one that focused on mining, agriculture, and export to one that includes trade, tourism, and industrialization. One can say this is due to good governance by the country's leader, which brings us to the next part, which is institutional quality. A strong and stable administration was developed by our country's leaders to tackle the challenges after gaining independence. There are 6 indices in the governance in the World Governance Indicator, which includes control of corruption, governance effectiveness, political stability, regulatory quality, rule of law, and voice and accountability. As shown in the table above, Malaysia has been performing well in all aspects except for voice and accountability. Even so, all of the aspects mentioned above has been improving over the years. The index that we'll be focusing on in this study, which is the rule of law. Even though both institutional quality and economic growth shows positive results, this does not mean that economic welfare will follow the same trend, as economic welfare takes into account factors such as environment, standard of living, and education. So in this study, HDI will be used to measure economic welfare, as it takes into account dimensions such as long and healthy life, being knowledgeable, having a decent standard of living. As you can see from the graph shown, the economic welfare measured using HDI has been growing steadily, but the growth rate is lower compared to GDP. So in this study, we intend to address the question on whether institutional quality have an effect on economic welfare. So now we're going into the problem statement. So one of the problems that we should address is, does GDP growth is equivalent to economic welfare growth, especially when there's cases of regional disparity exists, such as rural-urban disparities which are happening in our country, and whether that better institutional quality will lead to the better growth of the economic welfare. Now, we're going to the research objective. Our objective is to examine the impact of institutional quality on economic welfare in Malaysia. Now, we're going to the literature review. For the literature review, I've divided all the literature according to their findings. So first, we'll be going into the positive relationship. Actually, majority of our literature that we find actually shows positive relationship between the variables, between economic welfare and institutional quality. For example, Guimarães and Co. in 2020 discovers a positive relationship between public governance and quality of life, as well as Mohanji and Co. in 2019, where they conclude through the results of the analysis that welfare is enhanced by both quality of institution and mineral and oil resource rents. So next, we'll be going into the mixed relationship. Actually, there's also quite an amount of studies that actually shows mixed relationship between the variable. For example, Kim, Wu, and Lin in 2018 shows that governance can negatively affect productivity and income, and only would have a positive effect on productivity at high level of governance, which means that a enough level of governance is needed for the nation to benefit from the improvement of the government. And also, Zumashev in 2013 also shows that increase in collusive corruption can possibly have both negative and positive effect on growth. Thus, it can be said that when the effect of corruption on cost and benefit of the public sector are the same, it's possible to have a level of collusive corruption which maximizes growth. There's only one study where we find, which is Krishnan, Teo, and Lim 2013, shows that there's no relationship or insignificant relationship between the variables. Their results findings suggest that e-government maturity did not have a significant effect on economic prosperity and environmental degradation. So next, we will go into the research gap in the literature. So one of the gaps that we find when doing the literature review is that there's limited studies conducted on the relationship between institutional quality and economic welfare. Most of it is done on institutional quality and economic growth, and rarely will actually take into account economic welfare, which is a multi-dimensional index. And also that most researchers done was also based on sub-Saharan Africa and Western countries, and there's very limited studies which is done on the Southeast Asia region and Malaysia. So now we're going into the methodology. So for this study, we will be using the variables, dependent variable economic welfare, which will be proxied by the Human Development Index, HDI. While for the independent variable, we have the Law and Order Index, which is a proxy for institutional quality, and Consumer Price Index, public health expenditure, and trade volume. Now we're going into the empirical methodology. So for this study, we'll be using autoregressive distributed lag co-integration technique. But before that, we need to perform the unit test to test for the presence of integrated stochastic trend of I2. Because if there is an integrated stochastic trend of I2, the ARDL results would not be viable. So for this test, for the unit root test, we'll be using both ADF and PP tests. After passing both ADF and PP tests, we will proceed with the autoregressive distributed lag co-integration technique, ARDL co-integration technique, also known as ARDL bound test, to determine the long-run relationship and coefficients. And then we will derive the error correction model, ECM, using a simple linear transformation to obtain the short-run relationship and also the adjustment speed. We'll then perform diagnostic test, which is the serial correlation test and also the stability test. Next, this is the equation. This is the log linear function of our empirical model, where ln HDI is for human development index, ln IQ is equals to institutional quality or the rule of law index, ln trade is the trade volume, ln PHE is the public health expenditure, ln CPI is the consumer price index, and E is the error term. So now we will go to our data sources. Our data is actually secondary data. The data covers a period of 27 years from 1990 to 2016. So for HDI, we get it from the Human Development Reports of the United Nations Development Programme. For Law and Order Index, we get it from the report from PRS Group Incorporated. For Public Health Expenditure, we get it from the Department of Finance Malaysia. And while the Trade Volume and Consumer Price Index, we get it from the World Bank Indicator website. So now we'll be going into the results. So first is the unit-root test. Both ADF and PP test shows that all 5 series are stationary at first difference. So this implies that they are I1 and no variables are I2. Thus, we can proceed with the ARDL bound test. So in the ARDL bound test, we first determine the optimal lag length, and the optimal lag length selected is ARDL 12000. After that, we proceed with the serial correlation LM test, which we got a p-value of 0.3769, which is greater than 0.05. Thus, we does not reject H0 and there is no serial correlation. Next is the stability test. The Q-sum and Q-sum squared statistics all fall within the 5% critical bounds, so it shows that it is stable in both the short run and the long run. We then proceed with the bound test. The F statistic that we get from the bound test is 35.4828, which is larger than the upper bound critical value of 5.84 at 1% significant level. Thus, we reject H0 and there is a presence of long run relationship. This is the estimated long-run coefficients. So from our regression, we were able to get only Law and Order Index and CPI are significant in the long run, which with 5% and 1% significant level respectively. For Law and Order Index, there's a coefficient of 0.024636, which means that a 1% increase in Law and Order Index will cause a 1% increase, a 0.2463% increase in the HDI. While for CPI, the coefficient is 0.268557, which means a 1% increase in CPI would increase the HDI by 0.2685%, while public health expenditure and trade are insignificant in the long run. Next would be the estimated short-run dynamic coefficients. So as you can see, only public health expenditure and trade are significant in the short run with 10% significant level. And the ECT is actually negative 0.469557, which has a negative coefficient and also significant with 1% significant level. So there exists a co-integrated relationship between them. Next would be the conclusion. So first is our autoregressive distributed lag model. Our dependent variable Law and Order Index shows a positive and significant effect in the on institutional economic welfare in the long run, while it has a negative and not significant effect on economic welfare in the short run. Institutional quality have a positive and significant effect on economic welfare. Thus, we should be able to conclude that actions contributing towards upholding law and order in Malaysia should be implemented, for example, through education from a young age, reducing bystander effects, or maybe increase public police cooperations. So in the short run, any disequilibrium that were caused by the shocks in the previous period would need only 2.123 years in order to return to the long-run equilibrium. So the recommendations for future studies would be, I would recommend for future researchers to use a more comprehensive proxy for economic welfare once available for Malaysia, because currently most of the more comprehensive indicators, such as the measure of economic welfare, MEW, is not available for Malaysia, but only available for Western countries. And also that we would also recommend to use a different proxy for institutional quality indicator, since there are more than one indicator for institutional quality. And also that different regression method and analysis techniques, such as OLS, can be done also, since all the variables are actually on I1. These are the references that I use in my study. So thank you for your time. Thank you.